You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome back to Business of Drinks. I'm Scott Rosenbaum.
And I'm Erica Ducey.
Today's episode is sponsored by Creamy Creation. If you are thinking about launching a cream-based or emulsified beverage brand, this is an episode you won't want to miss.
We're joined by Matthew Benny, Chief Commercial Officer for the Americas at Creamy Creation. And this is a company that has been developing award-winning cream liqueurs and emulsified alcoholic drinks for brands all around the globe since 1979. Whether it's a bourbon cream, a plant-based oat liqueur, or even a cream-based RTD, this is the company that probably makes it. They are at the cutting edge of this highly technical category.
But don't be scared by the idea that this is technical. Matthew really brings the beverage space to life. He shares some incredible behind-the-scenes stories and lessons for founders. We touch on trends like indulgence and nostalgia and how they're motivating consumers. We also talk about how brands can stand out in this space, particularly the cream-based and emulsified beverage space, which, is often seen as very traditional and kind of staid.
Yeah, and Matthew explains some of the biggest misconceptions about cream-based beverages, like why they don't just sell in the cold months, why they're not just for female consumers, and why you actually don't need to refrigerate them. Plus, he talks about some of the biggest mistakes that founders make when launching in this space and how the right technical support can save you a lot of headaches down the line.
Yeah, Matthew also shares some incredible details on how to avoid the high cost, high minimum order quantity, or MOQ, bottlenecks of retort processing. This is a production technique commonly used in the production of cream-based liqueurs and emulsified beverages that, can really set unexperienced founders back if they don't know what they're doing.
I was really impressed to hear just how collaborative the process is of working with Creamy Creation. While some brands come to the table with a fully specced out product, others just have an idea, an inkling of what they might want to create. And there's an infrastructure in place at Creamy Creation to accommodate all types of clients.
Matthew also gives practical advice on how to market these products effectively. And, he delves into why many brands underinvest in their cream-based SKUs. He also shares, what it's like to work with a product development partner like Creamy Creation and steps that brands can take to ensure that they're successful in this development.
Yeah, so if you're exploring indulgent, innovative, or plant-based beverages, or you just want to understand what it really takes to bring a cream liqueur to market, this conversation is full of actionable insights.
Here's our conversation with Matthew Benny from Creamy Creation.
Matt, thanks so much for coming on the Business of Drinks.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'm interested, can you tell us about Creamy Creation? What do you do? Who do you work with? And what sets Creamy Creation apart in the beverage formulation world?
Sure. So we're a business-to-business cream liqueur developer and manufacturer. What that really means is we produce cream liqueur and other emulsified alcoholic beverages for the spirits industry, the wine industry, even the malt industry. So we work with customers of all sizes across the globe to do this. And really, we kind of work in two different angles where we can either provide development services and a full ready-to-bottle product. So we produce that for our customers based on their specifications. And, we work with them in the development of that. Or we can supply a concentrate or compound. So that's a cream liqueur, basically, that's homogenized. It's an ingredient. And then the customers take that back. They add their own alcohol, their own flavoring, and then finish the product themselves. So we can work in many different ways. Customization is kind of the name of our game. And, we work with, like I said, companies all across the globe doing this. And we've been doing it since 1979.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the background of the company.
Sure. So it's a pretty interesting story. I've gotten it a little bit piecemeal from people over the years. Luckily enough, we have a couple members of our R&D team in the Netherlands who have been around since the beginning, and even an ex-board member that was around at the beginning. So there's some good context there. In the 70s, Bailey's was invented, or basically the cream liqueur was invented at that time, and became very popular. At that time, spirits companies were looking to come out with their own cream liqueur to compete with Bailey's. And at that time, they came to what was then Campina Milk Products, which was a dairy cooperative in the Netherlands. And they said, hey, you guys are a dairy company. You must know how to make cream liqueur. Can you figure this out for us? And at the time, Campina said, I think with a little air of confidence, hey, yeah, we're experts in dairy. We can figure it out. So they went back and looked at Bailey's and looked at what a cream liqueur was and figured out how to do it themselves. So it's kind of an interesting concept, it stemmed all the way back from, requests from the industry. And since then, obviously, we've evolved quite a bit. We now have offices in the U.S. since the 90s, local production in the U.S. since the early 2000s. Our heritage is very much dairy-based. From that time there. And most of our backstory was with a dairy cooperative. But since 2019, we've pivoted, I would say, in our mindset to more of an alcoholic beverage company that can do multiple different things in the emulsified alcoholic beverage space.
Interesting. And so it's really a spirits focus. So does that cross cream-based liqueur, RTDs, and non-dairy cream liqueurs as well?
Yeah. So I would say, spirit is the main segment that we play in. We definitely do quite a bit in wine as well, even in the malt space. So there's flexibility there from, the alcohol perspective. We've got multiple vegan products that we've also come out with as innovations. And the RTD aspect is similar in terms of the science behind it and in the liquid, but really just developing for the RTD mindset. So something a little bit more drinkable, a little bit more sessionable.
And as Chief Commercial Officer, what does your role entail, and what trends are you seeing in the marketplace right now?
So my role is basically in charge of all the sales and marketing in North America and Latin America. So anywhere on this side, in this hemisphere. So I'm working with the sales and marketing team to make sure that, we're servicing our customers. We're trying to grow, we're developing new products. I'm also managing the lab here locally in terms of the day-to-day, making sure our customers are getting samples and everything is being commercialized correctly and appropriately. So it's a wide-ranging role, which is really nice. I've been with the company since 2012. So it's a very interesting position that I really enjoy. And in terms of trends, I mean, I think there's a lot that we're seeing out there. Indulgence is a general consumer trend that really translates well into cream liqueur, just naturally. People are really looking at that as, we call it permissible indulgence. So you're allowed to have, a nice cream liqueur after dinner. The same with nostalgia. That's something that we've definitely seen that plays well in the cream liqueur space. A lot of companies are looking at, some childhood recipes. Dessert, obviously, specifically mends well with cream liqueur. So that's really interesting to see. And generally in the cream liqueur space, you're starting to see a little bit more diversification. Companies are moving away, or I wouldn't say away, but they're opening their horizons to different flavor types. It's not just, bourbon, chocolate, coffee. They look at fruit flavors. They're also looking at the formats, I think, a little bit differently, where, cans, different formats for that are helpful in differentiating yourself. And the RTD space, of course, is, has everyone's attention at the moment. And customers are looking to develop cream-based RTDs. So whether that's a classic cocktail, something like an espresso martini with cream, I think 80% of our online inquiries are somewhat espresso martini based, or something like a mudslide, grasshopper, white Russian, things like that. And then people aim in between with something a little bit more innovative, coming up with some concepts themselves.
I love that. And on the innovation front, Creamy Creation, I noticed, has won some awards at WSWA, IWSC, and other awarding bodies for
Mhm.
its innovative concepts. So, can you talk us through some of those award winning creations and what made them stand out?
Sure. So we typically like to submit our samples. There's some custom concepts to these awards, especially WSWA. We've been going to that show for over a decade, probably 15, 20 years at this point, and we've been submitting for over 10. And really what we look at there is two different things. We either want to submit something that's really innovative, that A, catches the attention of the market, or B, we look for something that's just really good. We really try to use the best flavors, really nail down something that's familiar. So a familiar taste, a familiar concept, and just do it as high quality as we can. But we submitted an apple fritter on our oats base. So oats base is something that we came out with a few years back, which really stemmed from our customers asking for it. A lot of times we're actually on the other end where we're just experimenting and seeing how far we can push the limits of cream liqueur and emulsified alcoholic beverages, like what's possible. But that was one where we had people asking for it all the time. Oatly was growing like crazy. It was in the news all the time. And we said, all right, we got to get on this. So we did. It's an excellent product. And that won a double gold best in show. So, that was a success for us at that show for sure.
Nice. You're speaking my language. I don't drink milk, and I would love to have some cream liqueurs that are non-dairy based. Yeah, any brands out there who want to jump on that, I think that is an amazing opportunity. And I think it also speaks to your points about the expanding flavor horizons of these types of cream liqueurs, which I think is fascinating. And I imagine that these cream-based beverages, though, are technically challenging. I can think of all sorts of things that might go wrong. What are some of the biggest formulation or stability hurdles that brands face, and how do you help them overcome those?
Yeah, it's definitely a technical process. We've been doing it for obviously since 1979, as I mentioned. It's not a simple process, and that's why we have a business. The fact that we're one of few companies globally doing what we do, because it is a scientific process. It requires proprietary knowledge, specialized equipment, etc. There's definitely things to watch out for sure. Always cleaning your bottling lines, your filling lines. If you're blending, there's microbial concerns, using dairy products. So that's something that we're always pushing with our customers and helping with. The same goes for pH adjustments. The pH of your flavors and your spirits needs to be similar. So there's a lot of things to watch out for. I would say though that, that's where we come in. If we're doing a development for a customer for a ready to bottle product, we're doing that for them. So we're developing those products. We're ensuring that they're physically stable. We have a very thorough stability check system where we're putting the products under a large amount of stress from heat, and making sure that the products aren't breaking down. So that's something that we do with every single sample and production product we make. But on the other aspect, for the customers who are utilizing one of our concentrates or compounds and blending and bottling themselves, we offer a lot of technical support. So we have a whole technical support team that will go down to wherever the customer is, advise, walk them through the process of CIPing, of bottling. There's little things that you might not think of, like the speed and types of the pumps that are bringing the product in, the speed of agitation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not meant to scare people away, but more on the other hand of we're trying to comfort, and that's what our technical support team does, is give our customers comfort that they're producing the product the right way and it'll be stable for a long time.
Nice. And one of the recent innovations that I saw was a retort-free technology for low ABV cream RTDs. Now, can you talk through what is this technology? Why is it such a breakthrough? And how does it benefit brands?
Sure. So this is a really interesting one to give some context. So retort is not that well known for most people, I think, in beverage alcohol. Retort is typically a dairy process, which basically cooks the product at high temperatures to kill off the microbial growth. They actually look like big submarines, and you put the product in the bottles or the cans, and it's very high heat to kill all the microbes and make it shelf stable. So, as I think most people can attest to, the low ABV trend has been very big over the past few years. Typically, you see products with a range of ABVs, but we saw that a lot of our customers wanted to be in that 5% range, which I think is one of the biggest ones. To have a cream or emulsified beverage at that ABV range of 5 and under, you would need retort. The problem with that, and I've gone down this wormhole for years now, is that retort is really hard to find. If you can find a facility that retorts, they likely don't have an alcohol license and have no interest in getting one. Even if you find those two things, the availability is very, very difficult. So there is a very long line to get into a retort facility. The capacity is just not there. And even in addition to that, the MOQs for retort are extremely high. I'm talking millions and millions of liters per SKU a year. So we went down that road with a lot of customers. They were really interested. We even had some very big multinational brands looking for that product and trying to retort, and they just couldn't find a way through. They couldn't find anyone who was willing and able to do that. So we kind of looked at that and said, all right, well, what's the other option? Are there any other options? Of course, we looked at Europe. We're headquartered in the Netherlands. So we said, can we do it over there and ship it over? That was possible, but not ideal. There's not a lot of those facilities in the Netherlands either. And the other thing we saw was pasteurization is a lot more readily available in the market. So that's just a little bit of a step down in terms of the heat intensity. So that was readily available. We could find co-packers and contract manufacturers for our customers that could do pasteurization. So then we went back and said, all right, well, to do pasteurization, typically you need to be, let's call it 10 to 12%. So that's double what most people want. So we ended up developing this product and did a bunch of challenge studies with a lab to ensure basically that we could get the product in a can, pasteurize it, and then it could be in that anywhere from, let's call it 7 to 10% range. So granted, it's not down to the 5% that the market some people were looking for, but it offers another window for customers to go in at a lower ABV, pasteurize, which is something that they can find, it's commercially available, and then get that product to market.
I mean, that's fascinating. And I think, people wouldn't necessarily be thinking of just how specific and technical it is to produce these products. And also, the ABV requirements when you're, dealing with a milk product with the either pasteurization or retort or what's pretty complex. So on those lines, are there any other sort of challenges or things that you can share about formulating and growing categories like no alcohol or the plant-based creamy beverages?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I mentioned earlier that, in 2019, we became independent, no longer owned by the dairy cooperative. That really pushed us in a different direction, not fully in a different direction, but it opened our horizons a bit. The first thing we did is hire an innovation manager whose sole purpose was to come up with innovations and help commercialize them. And one of the first things we did is look at the non-dairy space, so the plant-based or vegan area. That was a pretty simple decision just based on general consumer trends. Like we said earlier, Oatly, almond milk, all those different alternative products were big and growing, and I think still are. So, we did the same with the low ABV, where it's just always on the top of our minds of, what's next? What are people looking at? And generally, how we look at it is you have the high level of general consumer trends, then food and beverage, then beverage alcohol, then spirits, and then cream liqueur. And we kind of filter from the top. So we look at what's going on in the general trends and see where that translates naturally into the cream liqueur or emulsified alcoholic beverage space.
And for a brand that's looking to develop a cream-based product, what does the process of working with Creamy Creation look like? And what can they expect at each stage?
Good question. Yeah. So it kind of depends on what the customer is looking for and how much of an idea they have of what they want to launch. We have people that come to us and say, hey, I want to launch a cream, but I have no idea what flavor or what concept. At that point, we'll try to be creative. We will be creative. We have concepts that we've either done before or some ideas. We'll brainstorm based on their brand, based on their branding, what they're trying to do, and come up with some proactive concepts for them. In the other sense, we have people who will come to us and say, hey, I want this product. It needs to be 15% ABV. It needs to be bourbon based. I want vanilla and chocolate flavors. Go do it. That's a little bit easier for us, but not as fun. And then we also, as I mentioned, have concentrate and compounds, which we can ship to customers, and they do their own development work themselves. So the point is, we're there at every step of the process for any of those categories, assisting not only in the development or the scientific part, but also in the marketing. That's one of the reasons that it's fun to work with some of the smaller guys, is they pull you into their marketing stories, and they'll ask your opinions on things, whether it's bottles, whether it's bottlers, whether it's branding and labels. So we're always here to help. We have a regulatory team as well. So every step of the way we're there. And then as mentioned previously, our technical services team, it can be on site to assist with bottling, blending, any of that from start to finish.
Yeah, it sounds like a really collaborative process, like as much as a brand might need. Let's talk about misconceptions. Are there any misconceptions that brands have about launching creamy products? And can you help clear some of those up?
Yeah, there's lots of misconceptions, I think. I think the first one is that it's a cold weather drink. It only sells in OND, in Q4. While that is typically, I would say, the highest sales months for cream liqueurs and other emulsified beverages, it's not the only time. We have plenty of customers who do a really good business in the summertime months. And it doesn't need to be a cold weather drink. You can create it with a lighter mouthfeel with fruit flavors, things like that. I think there's also a misconception that it's a female product. That's not the case. And there are definitely a lot of men that drink the product. And, I think I will say that it does allow brands to extend to women, I think, a little bit more naturally, where sometimes their bourbon or whiskey has a high consumer base of men and not as much women. So if they put bourbon and cream together, they reach that audience. But at the same time, there are plenty of men drinking eggnog and cream liqueur all the time. So that's one of them. And then in general, I think consumers always think that they need to refrigerate it. I will say it does taste better chilled, but there's certainly no reason to from a micro perception or a physical stability. The product will be physically stable out on your counter, on your bar cart, et cetera, for years.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a common misperception. So, is there any particular size of brand or production scale that would make a company a good fit to work with Creamy Creation? Is it both emerging brands and global players, or how does that shape up?
Sure. I mean, we work with everyone. We work with entrepreneurs who just have an idea and want to launch it. We've worked with quite a few people who had a family recipe that they wanted to commercialize and put out with little or sometimes no experience in the beverage space. We work with craft distillers and small customers, usually with our totes of concentrate and compound. And we work all the way up with the big multinationals. I would say our sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. The medium to large players who, those guys are the ones we typically do the ready to bottle products for. And they can move a little bit more quickly. I usually have a little bit more creativity, but we do work with everyone. It's just we customize what we do and what we offer service-wise based on what they need for their size.
And what advice would you give to a brand that wants to stand out in the cream-based product space? Beyond just a good idea, what else is crucial to success?
Sure. Of course, a good tasting product, but that goes without saying. I think marketing the product well is something that in cream liqueurs is sometimes overlooked. And there's a couple of reasons for that, at least in my opinion. I think some brands or some customers see cream liqueurs as just an add-on to another product. It's just another product line to differentiate themselves. And while that's great, and that does help them differentiate themselves and go on a different shelf, a lot of them tend to not advertise or promote or market their products, I think, as they should. We've definitely seen a few of our smaller customers who are really aggressive in the marketing. Their marketing campaigns do really well because of it, and really shine a lot of attention to that brand, where now when consumers go to the cream liqueur aisle, they recognize that brand versus just seeing what looks good or what concepts appeal to them. So I think that's a big aspect. And the other thing I would say is differentiation. There's a lot of brown flavors, bourbon creams, coffee, chocolate. Those are delicious. There's no denying that, but there's a lot of them. I think our customers who try to be a little bit more innovative, whether that's using one of our innovative bases, plant-based, oats, low calorie, whatever, but that helps them to stand out on the shelves.
Nice. And how would you say that consumer preferences, we talked a bit about indulgence. We also have trends like health and plant-based and low and no alcohol. What's really standing out as shaping product innovation in the category?
Sure. Like I mentioned, we have an innovation manager whose sole job is to really work with our marketing team, our sales team, and our R&D team to come up with innovative ideas and then get those innovations into our R&D department and get them commercialized. So we're always looking at different things. I think the plant-based and better for you space is just a natural progression. Cream liqueurs are generally not seen in that light, which is fair. It doesn't mean that it's actually slowed anything down, but we want to be differentiated in our product offerings. And really that's what we look for, is just making sure we have the ability to be able to commercialize and do what customers are looking for. So whether that be low ABV, lower calorie, plant-based, we want to have that in our repertoire. And typically with our innovation, we're sometimes a little bit ahead of the game in terms of coming out with products and launching them, and nobody really knows what to do with them, or they're not sure that it's ready, or it's that time for that product to go into the market. And that's fine. I think the benefit of that is that when someone comes to us down the road, we have, again, a bigger portfolio of options for them. And we've done a lot of things. We've tried these. We know what works. We know what doesn't work. And again, if a customer wants to really differentiate their product, we've got plenty of options that really would make them stand out and be different on the shelves.
Yeah, it sounds like an exciting opportunity, because if you're a little bit ahead of the trends, that's the place to be. And
For
then,
sure.
yeah, and then you're first to market with that product. What about geographic trends? Are there any particularly strong growth markets or untapped opportunities that you're seeing regionally?
Yeah, I mean, for us, North America and Europe are the biggest markets. I mean, I think that's just typical of the cream liqueur space. Those are just the two areas that have the highest consumption. Like a lot of other customers, Asia is very intriguing for us, just with the population there. Beverage alcohol is becoming more and more popular in that space. So, that's an area that we're definitely looking at. Latin America has promise as well. So there's, we ship to every corner of the globe and there's opportunity everywhere. But I would say that those are the most interesting at the moment.
Nice. And can you share favorite story about a project? Maybe something that started out as a spark of an idea and, turned into a successful product.
Sure. I'll give you two. One, which I just always like to mention because I think it's unique, is we actually had, I'm going back maybe 10 years, but we had a customer reach out to us to try to develop a horse milk liqueur. And they had the horses and they sent us horse milk. And we actually produced a sample of it on our pilot plant. It never commercialized, it never went through. But I always like to tell that story just because it's a good example of people thinking outside the box.
That's definitely outside the box.
Yeah, for sure. I tasted it. It wasn't as bad as maybe I would have thought it would be, but definitely unique. And I think the other story that resonates is we had some young entrepreneurs who were in the spirits industry, but more or less starting out. And they had the idea for a product line with our oats base. And, they were one that said, hey, nobody's really doing anything with this. And I don't know why. And they came to us, and within 4 months, I think we commercialized their product and got it into the market. And since they've launched an additional SKU from that and are doing quite well. So that was one. It went quick. They were, agile, and just the speed and I think the differentiation was really a great example of how you can stand out on the shelf. So that definitely resonates with me.
Yeah. And Creamy Creation has such a legacy now, going back 50 years or so. What would you say you're most proud of in terms of the company's contributions to the drink space?
The first thing I think of is innovation. For years, we were always looking at what's next. If you really look at the global market, we're always at the forefront of that innovation. I mean, we've come out with, I think, 5 or 6 innovations just over the past 5 years, multiple vegan products, a vegan coconut, retort-free oats, so that's, again, an area that, we're leading the way on and we want to be that leader in. And it's, there's always something next on the horizon. So I think that's the biggest. And then I think past that, our global reach, we're the only B2B cream liqueur emulsified alcohol supplier with plants on 2 continents. So really being the go-to party that we can do production in both continents is great.
Wow. And for listeners who are considering working with Creamy Creation, what's one thing that you'd want them to know about partnering with the company?
A few things. I mean, I think the first is that anything is possible. Anything can be customized. I mean, we can use any alcohol source. We can use any different ingredient. And I think the second is just, it's full service. So we're there every step of the way. We're not casting you off and just saying, hey, it's your problem now. Whether that be even a problem in bottling, which is typically out of our scope. We're producing the liquid, not bottling it. But, our technical services team will go down and assist with that and has a really in-depth knowledge. So, you're not on your own. I think cream liqueur sometimes it scares people a little bit just because of the microbial, the physical stability. And we're here to give you comfort that it's not a big, scary beast. We can tame it and we can do it together.
And what's the best way for listeners to reach out if they are interested in learning more?
I think our website is usually the best way, in creamycreation.com. You can either reach out to us in the Netherlands or the US from that. And those inquiries come in, and usually we respond that same day. We're always happy to get inquiries, and even if it's just talking about a project, talking about an idea, always happy to have the conversation.
That's awesome. And I love how collaborative it is and the innovation focus. I think that's such a fascinating partnership potential for brands. So, Matt, I think that's a great place for us to conclude. Thank you so much for coming on the Business of Drinks.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Business of Drinks. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening, and tap that notification button so you'll be the first to know when a new episode drops. And help us spread the word. Click those star ratings and share on social. It really does help us find new listeners. Finally, if there's something that you'd like us to cover on the podcast, tell us. We're at podcast@businessofdrinks.com or reach out via Instagram or LinkedIn. We want to hear from you, and we really do respond to messages. See you next time.